Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into today's episode of the Money Insights Podcast. My name's Christian Allen. I'm here with my co-host. You know him as Rod the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's going on, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. And I'm good because I'm trying to get excited about this podcast episode. I think I'm excited about it, but I'm having to do a little work.
For a long time.
I'm having to do a little work to get up for it. So here's the deal. This is a really important topic we're going to cover today. But it's one that we don't typically get into because it's like a lot of it kind of fits into the more traditional financial advisor role. Mm-hmm. And we are typically kind of playing contrarian to that, right?
Yeah.
Having said that, Rod, there are some principles, some things, some steps that we just have to do regardless of whether we want to do it or not. And this is, I believe, one of those things. So today we're going to be talking about creating your personal investment philosophy. Woo! That's a big one. It's a big one. Anytime we talk about bringing in philosophy, there's a lot there. But when you hear that idea, Rod, what comes to mind? Where do we start from your perspective?
Well, one of the things that we are going to try to do is give guidelines, principles, but it is personal, right? It is your personal investment philosophy, and so we can't tell you what it is. We're not going to hand you a checklist and you're just work down the checklist. You get to create your own checklist, and we'll just give you some guiding principles for that. Okay, I like that. We are going to like insert in here some of the things that we think are critical and important. Yep.
So if you're feeling like, well, if you're just going to tell me how to build, although, I mean, learning how to craft an actual investment philosophy is an important element. But we are going to, again, insert some of the things that we believe that really every personal investment philosophy should include.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be or the only, what am I trying to say here? There should be many other things in addition to, but that should at least be there as well. Okay. Yeah. So here's where we're going to start, Rod. We have to start by understanding our financial goals. How do we do that?
Yeah. So to begin with, we're going to start with the end in mind. Because the point is that you have long-term goals, mid-range goals, short-term goals, and those flow, but we have to make sure that we're understanding where we are in it. So you say, okay, well, long-term, where do I want to be? Well, I want to retire. I don't want to run out of money before I die. Okay, that could be a goal. But let's make it more likely. People are going to say, well, I have a net worth goal, or I have a goal to create this family foundation, or to pass the kind of the generational wealth kind of thing, and creating goal around that. So we want to make it specific and a stated end, a goal that we have in mind. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create some medium level goals that help us accomplish that. And then that leads to the shorter term stuff. What am I doing now and in the next couple of years that help me accomplish those things?
I think that makes complete sense, right? I got to walk before I run. I've got to make sure that before I pass on that 100 mil to my kids and to my foundation, before I do that, I probably need to make sure that I am personally, and this is an issue, Rod, but I'm personally secure in my own finances.
Sure.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard people be like, oh yeah, I want to pass all this money on to my kids, and they're like scrimping. They like don't have enough money to do their own.
Yeah.
So you got to walk before you run. So anyway, long and short is you've got to take the time and effort and energy that it requires to take a step back and really understand our financial goals. We're going to get into what that looks like. The first thing to do is assess risk tolerance. So risk tolerance one is one that I think is very nuanced, and it can be difficult because there's so many factors that come into a person's risk tolerance. And honestly, most people don't know or aren't thinking about many of the factors. So if you just went up and you said to somebody, if I, sitting across the table, hey, what's your risk tolerance? They might say like, oh, well, I'm like, I'm relatively conservative. I like, but they're not going to have like a strong, most likely not going to have a definitive strong answer for what that is.
Mhm.
So the point here is that you'll be in a better position when, again, trying to craft your overall philosophy, if you take the time to really assess the risk. One way that I do it, and I do this kind of for fun every once in a while, probably every year or two, I just go online, and you can find these all over, but they're basically risk tolerance questionnaires, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's you can get them to be as long and detailed as you want, or as short and simple as you want. But I usually like those ones that are like in the 20 to 30 questions, because I feel like I'm getting like real information there. It's not just general stuff, but it's not going to take me 2 hours to do. So anyway, one way that you could do that is just by adding kind of those personal general elements that you're feeling, and then bringing in something that's outside, looking at it without bias. That's a really great way to kind of get a feel for what your own risk tolerance is.
So if you do it on a regular basis, are you implying that risk tolerance can change?
I am implying that. Thank you. And that's one of the reasons I like to check it out, because there is no question that my risk tolerance changes, not just based on like age and income, but that is true.
Sure.
But it also is based on like what's happening in market fluctuation and my mentality in that time frame. So that's a really great point. This is one of those things that's not like you define your philosophy and then 40 years later your philosophy is going to look the same. It's like It's like anything else. Values, beliefs, politics, all of those things change over time. Similarly, your investment philosophy is likely to change with those things.
Yeah, and the risk tolerance within that. And one thing that I think as people are doing those assessments or starting to look at it, that you'll see is there are different types of risk. And often people will just say, oh, well, they'll talk specifically about their whatever investment risk. Let's just call it that, market risk. I'm very conservative, right? I have a low tolerance for risk as it relates to that. But there are other types of risk that we should touch on as well. One that's come up recently, interest rate risk, right?
It's a big one.
Matters. Liquidity risk, inflation risk, regulatory risk is one. As laws change, that clearly impacts the opportunities to invest and even the investments we may already have. You were talking to a little bit ago about short-term rentals and how regulatory risks. So maybe talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a huge one. I mean, in Hawaii, that's a great example of where there's a tremendous amount of regulatory risk around the short-term rental market because, well, as an example, in Maui, they've had these fires, and I think there's been additional regulation to try to push out some of the short-term rentals, because for them it's reducing the opportunity for the locals to have housing. Yep. So like in some, like, I get both sides of it. I get why investors wanted to have the opportunity, but I also understand why a given community, state, whatever, would want to protect themselves, right? Yep. So, but when you go into an investment, to your point, I have to be looking and considering what that is. Short-term rental, I still think the STR market is great. It has a lot of opportunity, but I also think that is one that you clearly have to go in eyes wide open, knowing that regulatory risk, where I invest, when I, like, all those elements are going to be an impact. Now, to be fair, I think there's also higher upside. So you're taking on that, knowing that. So anyway, the point is just go in with your eyes open. And I think regulatory risk is one that most people don't think about, but exists in really any investment. Like, it's there no matter what. So just be thinking about that along with those others that are probably more typical and come to mind early.
Yeah. And I would include business ventures with that. Like if you were getting your own business or you're looking at investing in a business, understand what kind of regulatory risk exists, either because of what is existing on the books, that's easier to assess, but the things that could potentially come down the road that would fundamentally change the nature of the business.
Okay, so we've focused on understanding our financial goals. We've assessed our risk tolerance. Let's talk for just a minute about the overall broad role that asset allocation has inside of creating your own personal investment philosophy.
Yeah, once we've understood risk, different investments have different risk profiles, and we want to be broad, be diversified across different asset classes, different assets inside of a class, so that we're not taking all of the same risk on all of our money, all of our investment. So when we talk about, again, market risk or say inflation risk or liquidity, all those different kinds of risk, each different investment is going to have different ways that those risks hit it, right? And so if I'm way too heavily on one thing, we saw this recently for people that were way too heavily invested in just real estate, and especially multifamily that involves using leverage, etc. If you got hit all at once, all at the same time, because you're all over invested in the one thing, that makes a huge difference, as opposed to being diversified, because higher interest rates are actually much better for other types of investments, right? So having that diversification, or looking at what your asset allocation is in, whether it be the traditional, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate, businesses, other alternative assets, you want to be across a broad array of different asset types.
I think this seems like one of those things that's really obvious to people.
Yeah.
Like everybody looks at, we're like, okay, obviously we should have good asset allocation, diversification. That's like one of the buzzwords, right?
Yeah.
The issue is when individuals are successful inside of inside of a singular sector of investing, it can be really enticing. Okay. And the reason we know this is because history tends to repeat itself. We saw this clearly in 2008. People were banking it, making, especially with new builds, that world became like, they just couldn't do it fast enough, right? And so then people are cranking it out. And instead of in that moment being like, you know what? I'm going to reallocate my investments into where some of the money that I'm putting out here is going toward things that aren't on fire right now. That can be a really, really hard thing to do. So to your point, we've seen it recently with multifamily. We saw it in 2008 with just real estate in general, and especially people who were, developing and flipping and stuff like that. So it's one of those things that you always have to be considering. And I think we've seen that in the stock market the same way in several different, I think about, well, especially in the 90s and the tech boom, where it was like, ooh, you throw a dart and you're just like crushing it with with another tech stock.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's a lot of examples of this. So while it seems obvious and you might be thinking, okay, guys, duh, there is a different element. And that is like, this one takes discipline. Yep. So you have to add discipline to that. Otherwise, it's just like hyperbole.
Yeah.
Right? So you've got to add that discipline element.
I'm going to add one more. Business owners, we see it so often that crush it in their business, and that actually becomes the challenge for them, because if they say, well, where can I put more money and make the most of it? It's in my business. Just pour fuel on that fire, and pour fuel on that fire, but be disciplined enough to say, okay, but I should also do these other things so that I can become diversified. And who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows what the future
and you're
holds.
right. Like it doesn't have to be like it can be a relatively small amount of money. I always tell people this: the best way to avoid risk is to have cash. Investment risk specifically, right? Because I can basically handle any situation if I have plenty of liquid reserve cash. So, but if I don't, that's when I end up getting in trouble. Oftentimes it's a banking situation because of leverage. Well, having cash is the solution to that. So inside of this, your point is make sure that I'm pulling off of the stuff that's crushing it, and I'm putting it in other places so that when it's not crushing it, I have an opportunity to rely on other funds if I need to.
Yep.
Okay. Asset allocation is critically important. So now that we've talked about asset allocation, we need to focus on evaluating our time horizons. Why is that important?
Yeah. So if all the things we've been talking about up to this point, goals and the asset allocation and risk tolerance, all those things are leading us to what am I going to invest in, right? Well, this time the time horizon is the same thing because it depends on where I am in and what I'm trying to accomplish, what goals I'm working on is going to help me determine what I invest in, and obviously time horizons matter. So I'll give an obvious example is if I'm locking my money into a real estate syndication or something else that I know is going to have some sort of maturing period before I get my money back, I have to know I'm not going to need that money before I put it in, right? And again, some of these things just seem so obvious, and yet we have to build it into the philosophy because there will come times where you're making decisions and you have to make sure that you're remembering to take these things into account. I'll give another example. For a lot of people, myself included, creating enough cash flow to be able to replace my working income is a goal, right? But personally, I know that I'm probably at least 10 years away from that. So when I'm making investment decisions today, I'm not just focusing on cash flow. I do create cash flow from a lot of my investments, but I'm also focusing on things that can just grow the asset. So when it cashes out in 5 to 10 years, that I've created a really cool return, I turn around and I put it back into something else. But then the closer I get to that place where I need to be replacing my working income, now I really am focusing on cash flow investments specifically so that I accomplish the goal when I get to that point in time. That this is all based on those time horizons.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've understood our financial goals, we've assessed risk, we've talked about asset allocation, we've evaluated our investment time horizon, Rod. Now we need to specifically define our investment principles. And maybe what we'll do is we'll talk about, in conjunction with defining kind of your own principles, we can talk about the general money insights principles that we traditionally. So we told you early on, this episode isn't about creating a roadmap of exactly what your personal investment philosophy should look like. Having said that, it's really a way to bring in kind of the general principles with our personalized principles and create what really, the thing that really drives us forward. So, Rod, let's talk about the incorporating the 6 core principles and how that works as you're kind of defining our kind of own personal principles, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So starting from the general sense, you have goals that you've made, right? Because we already talked about it. So you already did it. And those goals are going to direct your values, the principles, the guiding principles that you're using as you're deciding how to invest. I'll give a quick example. So I've talked before about our client who has a goal. His long-term goal is to eradicate veteran homelessness. And then he has short-term goals that he's working on right now, primarily to build streams of cash flow that he can then use to build up this structure that he's going to use to accomplish the long-term goal. But he has guiding principles now in all of his decision-making because of what the long-term goal is. And that can include, obviously, housing is a big piece of that if we're going to eradicate homelessness, but it also includes systems in terms of whatever, food, supplies, all kinds of different things. And again, that's helping him he's guiding his decision-making now as he is working towards short-term goals that get to the long-term. So
the 6 core principles that we focus on, you've heard us talk about them: tax optimization, asset allocation, and estate maximization. So, and really what we're suggesting in this is that everybody's these should be inside of your own investment philosophy. It shouldn't be, that's not all inclusive, right? That list is only the general principles that I want to be utilizing in order to optimize my ability to build wealth. What I do now is I then bring in all of these personal things that we've talked about, right? Our financial goals, our risk tolerance, our time horizons, and just our values and beliefs. And once I do that, that's where the investment philosophy, this kind of broader document, can actually come together and start to make a lot more sense. So we're not saying, again, this is everything. We're just saying we are welcoming you to use our 6 core principles because we are 100% certain that they will help you build wealth. Is that fair, Rod?
I agree. Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so now that we've kind of defined our principles, we've integrated, hopefully, we've incorporated our 6 core principles into the philosophy. Let's talk about focusing on the 5 key benefits. And again, this is us like suggesting some of the things that we think are really important. So you can kind of look at this in 2 ways. One, it's kind of an example of some of the elements of what we need to do here on a company level. And number 2, it's things that are just generally going to be good for anybody who wants to build wealth, right? Like these are the things that we teach people to incorporate when we're saying, okay, if you want to generate, if you want to create generational wealth, and again, that means something different to everybody. But if you want to do that, well, these are all principles and things that are going to get you there more quickly. Okay,
Yeah.
And these are benefits you want to achieve in order to get there more quickly. Okay, talk about them, Rod.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about them in the context of we have our invest with benefits philosophy, right? Which creates the 5 key benefits, the 6 core principles, and so this is built within this context. But of course, this can be personalized to you, right? So let me talk through what they are. Number 1 benefit: producing higher investment returns. Number 2, optimizing the cash flowing in and out of investments. 3rd, maximizing retirement cash flow. 4, generating tax savings, not just tax deferral. And 5, building generational wealth.
Okay, so when I hear those things, Rod, there's some of them that are pretty like specific. And then of course that last one's a little bit, or maybe a lot more general, right?
Yeah.
We're just kind of suggesting that's a general goal for everybody. But when I look at the first one, okay, how does an individual produce higher returns? I understand it on a company level, and obviously I understand it, but tell people as they're looking at that, like, why should that be, like, what does that even mean? Why should I have a principle that means, hey, I'm going to go produce higher than what, Rod? What does it mean?
Yeah, so it's going to be I'll just call it optimal returns, right? Again, across the asset allocation. So you have to think about it in terms of my risk profile is going to help determine what the return is going to be on something. And I'm not always going to produce the highest level of return in everything that I invest in. But I obviously want to optimize those returns, right? While still keeping the right amount of liquidity and still accounting for interest rate risk and doing all the different things we talked about already.
So for us, this means helping people utilize things like the investment optimizer and things like I'm just going to go to the obvious ones and tax optimization, right? Utilizing those 2 things, bringing those together, that is a great example of how I can produce a higher return. So really what we're saying is use these elements that are here. And so on a personal level, it actually just means the same thing. I think what we're actually saying here is utilize the investment optimizer, utilize tax benefits, utilize anything that's out there that gives me an opportunity, especially utilize leverage, right? These are the things that we're suggesting to utilize in order to actually produce the optimal return. I like that wording better for an individual, but those are the types of things that you can do as an individual to actually, execute that plan.
Yeah. And that carries obviously into the other pieces as well. We recently recorded an episode specifically on the these 5 key benefits, and they definitely overlap. The optimizing cash flow and maximizing retirement cash flow. A lot of that has to do with actually number 1, right? If I'm producing higher returns, optimal returns at the individual level, that's going to happen in part because I'm optimizing the cash flow. I'm creating this retirement cash flow that I can live off of and comfortably make sure that I'm good.
Okay, state our return. So the first one was producing higher investment returns. Okay, go through the other 4 just because I want to make sure that they're applicable, like that that people know how to apply the concepts.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's hard to say, hey, adopt these principles if I don't understand how to adopt them. So just let's go through them really quick.
So then the second one is optimizing the cash flowing in and out of investments.
Okay, and maybe just talk about how do I do it?
Yeah. So the investment optimizer again is the biggest one there, because I have the money I'm flowing in and out of investments anyway. The investment optimizer just makes it so that I get better returns. I enhance the returns, the amount of cash, because of these additional benefits that I get from it.
Rod, are there any other ways that you can think of that somebody would optimize cash flow?
Yeah, well, leverage is another big one, right? So dollar for dollar, the money I'm putting in, I can create more cash flow coming back by using conservative leverage.
Yeah, and similarly with velocity, like the speed by which all those elements come into play.
Yes.
That makes sense. Okay, so that's number 2. What's number 3?
Number 3 is maximizing retirement cash flow.
Okay, and so just as a quick reminder, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because, to your point, we're releasing an episode, or just barely released an episode, on the 5 key benefits. But basically, we're suggesting, how do we maximize our retirement income? We say cash flow because a lot of the people that we work with happen to be cash flow type investors, right? So really, to me, this means bringing together the best of the traditional world, whatever I have in that space, whatever I have in the alternative space, bringing those things together to create an optimal cash flow situation. One of the ways to do that is incorporating things like leverage. We talk a lot about the capital avalanche as a way to do it, but there are several ways that I can ultimately maximize my retirement income and retirement cash flow. Just in the same context, we can go to what we often call part 2 of the investment optimizer, where we turn that into a tax-free stream of income, which then of course has an impact on every other dollar that I'm bringing out. Yes. Okay, we won't get into any more of those details, but just as an individual, those are the things that I can be thinking about as it relates to optimizing retirement cash flow.
Okay, and then number 4 is generating tax savings, not just tax deferral.
Okay, quick blurb on it. How do they do it?
Yeah, so again, our focus here is on doing things where the tax benefit that I'm getting now is permanent. I'm not just pushing the tax down the road. So business is a big way to do that. Investing in real estate and other alternative assets create really cool opportunities to create tax savings, permanent tax savings.
Okay, perfect. And then the 5th key benefit is
building generational wealth.
And really what we're suggesting here is bringing all of the key elements of the other principles. All of this is coming together to achieve my ultimate goal. And what we're suggesting really is, by doing these things, that will happen.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. The last thing that we need to do, Rod, well, I should say this. There's 2 more pieces that we need to be remembering or thinking about in order to craft, to create, and define our personal investment philosophy. Those 2 last things are, first, we have to develop a consistent process, a consistent investment process, a way that we do things so that we don't deviate when things get hard, right?
Yeah.
We talked a lot about how to, if I believe in asset allocation, then now I need a plan to actually be consistent and deliver on that. So we'll talk about that in a second. And then finally, we have to talk about adapting to changes, because to your point earlier, Rod, things are not stagnant. Our personal beliefs change, outside investments change, the world, politics, everything is constantly changing.
Yeah.
So does our investment philosophy need to.
Yep.
Okay, talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, so on the investment process side, we have to have a systematic way that we're doing it. In other words, the things we talked about earlier are helping us decide what types of investments we want to get in. Well, now I have to actually go find those investments. So what types of processes do I have in place to identify investment opportunities? This could be tapping into different investment communities, which exist all over the place, whether I'm investing in real estate, whether I want to invest in businesses, et cetera, right? So across the board, I can tap into different communities to do that, which then gives me access to individual investment opportunities. I also need to have a way to evaluate those opportunities, do my due diligence before I decide whether it's appropriate for me to invest in them based on my goals and risk tolerance and all the other things we talked about. So, and then as I'm investing, as I'm doing maybe like a continual evaluation of the investments that I'm already in, keeping up on them, tracking cash flow, tracking the progress on the project or the business or whatever it is that I've invested in. I just want to have tools, systems in place that help me to do that, and then help me do an evaluation again while I'm going, but especially on the back end, once I'm done, how do I evaluate the performance of it and incorporate new ideas, new processes, new resources into the next go around.
Brilliant. I don't think I have anything to add to it, Rod. So that is how you develop a consistent investment process.
Boom.
Rod said it. Okay. And then finally, we have to just make sure we're adapting to change. You touched a little bit on this as we were just listening to you, but I think it's obvious. There's a lot of changes that could happen. Yep. I don't know that I need to give a lot of context for this. The typical ones we think about are like relationship status, right? If I have, or maybe I'll give an example. Maybe a kid that you had a child that thought they were going to go to, become a doctor, and you were trying to save up a bunch of money for XYZ education, and really they went to a great trade school, or they became a salesperson and are crushing it, or whatever, right? Yeah. And maybe things change. The point is everything constantly changing. I don't think we need to talk more about it. Critical to a strong, competent, I don't know what the right word is, but core philosophy is making sure that we're adapting to that. Okay, let's do a quick recap, Rod, because I think we've hit on all of the elements that we need in order to create a personal investment philosophy, and then I'll wrap this thing up. Okay, so first we have to understand financial goals. Do you think did we do that, Rod?
Agreed.
Okay, next we have to assess our risk tolerance, understand the role of asset allocation. We've got to evaluate investment time horizons, make sure that we define what our core principles are. We would encourage everybody to incorporate the 6 core principles into your own philosophy. We've talked a lot about those, and Rod gives his personal guarantee that will help you build wealth most effectively.
Yes, sir.
Then keep the focus on the 5 key benefits, right? Like, again, and you might have other benefits that go with this. So just as an aside, these are foundational principles, but they are probably not all inclusive. We have to develop a consistent investment process. And finally, Rod, we have to make sure we're adapting to change. And once we do all of those things, and we have created a cohesive personal investment philosophy, whoo, that's a lot. Yeah. Anything to add?
It can be done. Just pick a starting point. It's not going to all happen overnight. And I mean, we talked about in terms of adapting, you can build it as you go. You will build it as you go either way.
Okay. I like it. Okay. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth-building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.